Hello, hi, happy June. How is everyone doing? Welcome to May's reading wrap up. It's the start of a new month, which means new books and new books to review. If you're new to my channel, welcome in. My name's Charlotte and I film some bookish content amongst other stuff. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Can you believe I've made it to June and I haven't bought any books this year or spent any money on books? The only thing I've spent money on is a library fine, and that was like £1.20. One of my New Year's resolutions, I guess, for this year, for those of you that don't know, was to not buy any more books in an attempt to start making my way through my physical TBR, and it's working really well. And do you know what? I think I'm going to keep up the same energy. We're going to keep going as long as we can. I have no reading target set this year, but in 2024 I've read 36 books so far. I read 8 books in the month of May, so let's get reviewing. First book I read in May was actually Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas, which is the last book in the Throne of Glass series. I've decided I'm not going to be reviewing this, which I understand is going to be a little bit of a disappointment to some of you, especially as I've reviewed the rest of the books, but recently I've stumbled across some information about why Sarah J Maas is a problematic author, and I decided to do a little bit more research into that and have a little bit of a search into it online, and I just decided it felt irresponsible to discuss or to review or to mention her books in any capacity on my channel moving forward. It's a shame because I really enjoyed the series up until that moment, and I just don't want to review this book on my channel. It gives me the ick thinking about it a bit now. I feel a bit better knowing that I didn't actually purchase any of the Throne of Glass series. I downloaded them all online or borrowed them. It is quite easy to find out about her various controversies online, so I won't be going into them in detail, but I would suggest that you research them if you would like to find out more, and I would implore you to do so. I know you're probably thinking oh Charlotte, why did you mention that then in this video? Why wouldn't you just leave the book out in its entirety? You could just never mention her books again. It felt a little bit disingenuous to me because I have reviewed so many of her books on my channel throughout the last year of me creating content, and also I very much want people to know why I won't be purchasing or reviewing any of her books moving forward. That just doesn't align with my values and my views. That's the only reason I've gone out of my way to say something today, because I think to be an ally is to be loud and clear about your allyship. Sick and tired of authors being shitty people and doing shitty stuff. But anyway, we're going to move on to my second read book of the month. I just wanted to say that. The second book I read this month was a Kindle book. It was One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is part of a duology. It's the Shepherd King book 1, and it is a fantasy, and I think it's slightly positioned as young adult, but I couldn't really tell. It seems like it is, but it's not officially saying that, but a lot of people are saying that it is. I like to give a little synopsis about each book, and it's not always amazing, but I'll try my best. So the town of Blunder is completely flooded and steeped in a mist that terrifies its residents, and there is an infection that's spreading that gives everyone that gets infected a magical side effect. Having said magical side effects can get you killed for having them by the town's guard. Our main character Elspeth has such side effects. She has a magical spirit that lives in her head 24/7 that she's dubbed Nightmare. So she meets a highwayman on the road one dark night and joins a quest to free Blunder from the mist and the infection, but they must gather the 12 Providence cards. That was quite a bad synopsis because I felt like the synopsis would have had to be really long. I saw this recommended to me on TikTok, and overall I really enjoyed this book. I think, as with a lot of TikTok-y hype books, there's always going to be really mixed reviews, and for me, yeah, I quite enjoyed it. So I heard it was a tarot inspired magic system, dark gothic-y kind of fairy tale-esque romance, and a duology, and that for me right up my street. Definitely a gothic-y fairy tale, forest based fantasy. A lot of people were saying it was romantic fantasy, and to me it had more of a feel of a fantasy with quite a prevalent subplot of romance, but it didn't feel overly romantic. There was one sex scene that is written on paper. There's a bit of fade to black, but this sex scene was written, but it didn't feel overly spicy or erotic. I know fantasy romance and fantasy is a bit of a fine line for a lot of people. I was a little bit hesitant that it would feel a touch young adult for me because I'm not such a huge fan of the young adult genre, but honestly this read quite well. I really loved the setting of the book, this kind of gothic-y, cold forest, gnarly, dark, misty world. I find that kind of setting really comforting in reads. It's kind of that grim fairy tales type world, isn't it? It's the same kind of world setting that meant I loved a series of unfortunate events. It makes me feel so cozy and comfy. I find a lot of comfort in it. It reminds me of like Little Red Riding Hood. The magic system was fairly well developed, but honestly I would have loved to have seen a little bit more from it. The idea is that each person that uses magic via the Providence cards like pays a terrible price for it. So for instance, the Maiden card, which provides the user with like endless beauty, like otherworldly beauty, with prolonged use over time they lose their emotions and their warm-heartedness and they become like really cold-hearted and unfeeling. I really thought this aspect of like paying a terrible price could have been made really sick and twisted, and I would have enjoyed seeing that becoming a bit darker as the book went along. Like I would have liked to see that pay the price element taken further, but I kind of understand that the slight young adultishness of the book didn't really lend itself to writing really dark magic. While there is like a lot of death and murder in this book, it was kept like fairly PG. I liked Raven and Elspeth. Raven is our like male main character and our love interest, and I feel like they were quite good counterparts for each other, but I don't think they had much chemistry. I felt like it almost would have been better if they'd have just been like kept platonic. It didn't really bother me because I wasn't reading it for the romance element. Like I was quite invested in the story, but I felt like they were making better partners in crime than romantic love. There is an element of found family in this as well, which I always find really enjoyable to read. Overall, I remember reading it and having like a few criticisms, but to be honest, my enjoyment of reading the book outweighed those criticisms, and I didn't write them down at the time, so I can't really remember them. So I feel like I've covered everything. Yeah, I did like it and I did enjoy it, and it was easy to overlook the things that I was a bit like eyebrow raise at because I felt sucked into the story. Straight out of the first book into the second. Another Kindle read, I read Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig, and this is the Shepherd King series book 2. So to synopsise, Elspeth and Raven have gathered nearly all of the Providence cards except for one, which is the Reclusive Twin Elders card. To retrieve it, they have to head into the mist-cloaked forest of Blunder, and the nightmare in Elspeth's head is the only one that can guide them there. So I was fairly invested in the sequel. I feel like Rachel Gillig has done a really good job of making us care about the characters. I didn't actually even really mind the introduction of different POVs, which I usually am quite resistant to. And I felt like the inclusion of Elm's POV was really smart because I really like Elm as a character. I feel like Elm is more complex than Raven, and I just enjoy reading about him a bit more. Elm to me feels more well-rounded, and I actually really enjoy his like neediness of his character. Raven is a little bit drab to me, and I'm wondering if it's because Raven and Elspeth / the Nightmare's narrative voice like doesn't feel that separate to me. I feel like their thinking style isn't that different, so I think maybe they just weren't separate enough. They all kind of blended into one. There was more stuff in the second book than the first that didn't work for me. Firstly being, I really missed the inclusion of Elspeth in this whole book. I know the plot required this, but it was that she almost felt like so left out that I just was like thinking like, where is she? And it was almost a little bit disappointing. We didn't really hear from her much. Really enjoyed Elm and Iona, although I wish their kind of romance had been a little bit more dragged out. It felt a little bit quick. I know it wasn't the longest book ever. A little more time investment in them would have felt more organic to me, but I did still enjoy their romance angle. There was some writing about plots and backstories that felt so confusing to me. I had to reread like several pages again throughout the book, and I'm unsure whether this was maybe my reading comprehension or just very confusing sentence structure. I'm more inclined to think it's the latter, but will take responsibility if it turns out it's just a me problem. It felt like so bizarre at some points that I was like, am I just not getting this? Like I couldn't understand the sentence. If anyone else has read this and feels the same about the sequel, I'd love to hear, because yeah, I was a little bit confused by that. Overall, I did like this book, less so than the first, but it is a duology, so you know, this always happens with me, and I would recommend reading both of them if you've got some time, if you want something that feels a little bit different. You may find some of the revelations in the last third of the second book a little bit obvious, especially if you pay attention to the rhymes and riddles throughout the book and if you're good at spotting patterns. Despite that, it's still a really enjoyable read, I think. Very immersive, and for me it's highly rated because I enjoyed the setting, I enjoyed the magic system, although I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from it. I love the gothic forest visuals, and I found all of that overall like really comforting. My next book in May was an audiobook, and I listened to it on Spotify. I didn't realise you get 15 free hours of audiobook with your regular premium subscription. It doesn't tell you how much you are through those hours, so I started a book and I'm like 2 hours in, and my subscription doesn't renew for like another 8 days, so I have to wait 8 days to listen to my audiobook. Anyway, the audiobook I listened to was Piglet by Lottie Hazel. This is contemporary fiction. The cover is absolutely beautiful, and I'll give you a little synopsis. Piglet is an up-and-coming cookbook editor at a London publishing house. She has wonderful friends and a wonderful life, and she's engaged to her very handsome fiance who's called Kit. Overall, she's very happy with how her life has turned out, but 13 days before her wedding, Kit confesses an ultimate betrayal, and Piglet finds herself increasingly unsettled in the run-up to the wedding. This was a little bit of a gamble of an audiobook on Spotify for me, and I'm not particularly mad that I went to listen to it. I went listening based on cover alone this time, based on the vibe, and it was fairly short. I think it was 10 hours. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it, and it was just like a very average listen. It kind of falls into that category of slightly deranged, unhinged female lead, or at least it's trying to be that. I do think it is that. I just don't think it's like really giving, but I will get into that now. Maybe I think it just went on a little longer than it needed to, even though it is a very short book. The food descriptions in this are absolutely divine, decadent, indulgent. I love foodie books, and hearing about the food and the descriptions and the ingredients and the prep, I really enjoyed that. I love eating, I love food, I love cooking as well, so that felt quite delightful at points to listen to. I will say there is a much wider theme here about eating disorders, and to clarify, the bits I enjoyed hearing were about the cooking process, not about Piglet's binging habits and her eating disorder. Binge eating and hunger is like a huge metaphor in this, so yeah, that's not what I'm referring to enjoying. You watch her absolute descent into unhinged decisions, and you watch her like completely spiral in these 13 days leading up to the wedding, and it's quite frustrating and quite uncomfortable at times. It feels intense because you want Piglet to see her worth and what she deserves. I think I felt a little bit disconnected from this read because I didn't like any of the characters. I lost interest in the last third of the book, and I feel like it peaked a little bit early. Very, very light spoiler, but I think it will be a deal breaker for those that are going to read it. This is your time to skip. We never find out the secret. We never find out what it is that Kit did. I know that that's the point, and honestly this isn't a deal breaker for me, but it was kind of frustrating, and I think that's what kept me listening, and that's what keeps you hanging on, is that you think you're going to find out what it is that Kit did. I don't know, didn't love it, didn't hate it, feel like no kind of way about it really. Next I read a book that was on Kindle Unlimited. This was Cut and Thirst by Margaret Atwood. This is a short story fiction. It's about 35 pages, so very short. 3 older women meet regularly to chat shit, drink wine and eat cheese, and one day they scheme to avenge their friend Fern, who is an old friend that has been wronged in the publishing industry. So it's basically a very short story about revenge and retribution. So yeah, this is literally 35 pages and free on Kindle Unlimited. I think worth a little read if you like Margaret Atwood's books and you're a quick reader. If you want a little palate cleanser, it's quite nice for that. It's very strong female friendships vibe. It's quite light-hearted. I think it's enjoyable because it reads as a conversation you quite literally might have with friends. It's got that kind of loyal friendship vibe energy about it. It feels very refreshing because it reads as a conversation that you literally might have with your friends, like around wine and over food. It has some funny moments. I will say it's not particularly deep. It doesn't need to be. I mean, it's only 35 pages. The loyalty of the friends struck a chord with me. All slightly older, so it feels very like ruminating and reminiscing as they kind of take note of the changes that have happened in their lives, the changes that have happened in their bodies, in their families. It really made me think that one day like I'll be sat with my friends discussing all of that stuff, and that's kind of why I enjoyed that. It was a little bit spooky to think about. It's just like, yeah, little 35-page read. It ended very abruptly, and it did make me think it would almost be better if it was a longer book because I liked the characters in it, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about them. But yeah, it was just very okay. I don't think it was one of her best. The next book I read, I think all my books were digital this month, were they? Oh no, I've got one physical. The next book I read was Babel by R.F. Kuang. Historical fiction brackets fantasy. I've been really looking forward to reviewing this, to be honest. So in the 19th century, Robin Swift is left orphaned in Canton, and he is whisked away to London by the mysterious Professor Lovell. In London, he is educated in ancient Greek, Latin, Chinese and English in preparation for his admission to the prestigious translation unit at Oxford University, which is called Babel. A Chinese boy raised in Britain, Robin soon realises that to serve Babel is to betray his motherland. And as his studies progress, Robin realises he has to choose between Babel and the secretive, shady Hermes Society, which is a secret organisation dedicated to stopping imperial expansion. So you are going to get a very mixed review on this with me, so bear with. I will try summarise my thoughts and feelings at the end as well. Dare I say it, this will be the longest review of this month because this was the longest book I read this month. I was very, very intimidated to read this. It's been on my list since it came out in hardback, but there was no way I was reading the hardback version. I don't know if any of you saw just quite how long the hardback version was. It's 560 pages, but the spacing of the hardback literally made it like this thick, and it didn't come out in paperback in time for me to buy it. So I just thought, you know, the easiest way I'm going to tackle this is on Kindle. I'm not going to lie, when my book buying ban is up, I probably will buy it because I loved the cover so much. And I'd be tempted to buy it in hardback just because it looks so gorgeous. I also was very intimidated to read this because I don't like to speak down on myself like this, but I thought I was maybe a bit too dumb to read this, or that I thought I wouldn't get the finer points. And all I'm going to say is if you're worried about picking this book up for the same reason, honestly, don't worry. Immediately I can say that I did love this book. I think it was my favourite read of the month. I will say it's more of a historical fiction that brushes up against the genre of fantasy. The magic system is mentioned quite a lot, but doesn't feel very intensely developed and very watertight. So I wouldn't say it's overall a fantasy. The intensity of the book and the subject matter and how etymology and linguistics is discussed at times can make it read a little bit like a textbook, but I still found it not inaccessible. I found all those segments really digestible and really interesting. It really did make me want to go pick up a book about linguistics afterwards. I'm one of those people that I love to learn. I love to constantly feel like I'm learning from the books I read. So to feel completely fascinated by this book while I was still reading it and close it and feel like I've studied something is a really nice feeling for me, which is why I enjoyed it so much. I try not to draw comparison between two books, but the first half of the book was giving me the same energy as The Secret History in how it made me feel reading it. That kind of dark academia, start of term. I love academic books that are set in schools and colleges. That it's that like first half when they start, the first year energy. I just find it quite cozy. I hate to say the word cozy so much, but it's like the promise and the optimism of a new academic year, the seasons. It makes me feel fuzzy and hopeful, and learning about the campus and seeing the characters kind of like naivety as they enter their first year in academia. I just really like how that subject matter makes me feel. So Robin and Professor Lovell are great characters. I think Professor Lovell makes a very good villain. They feel well developed. Letty didn't feel like a real character at any point, to be honest. She just felt like an add-on, a bit of a cardboard cutout that is supposed to be the mouthpiece for like white fragility and white naivety, and like the privileged daughter kind of cardboard cutout. Her character just becomes increasingly more unsubtle, and I found myself incredibly annoyed throughout the whole book by Griffin. This is when my review of Babel becomes a bit mixed, because of course ultimately the book is about colonialism and revolution and how all of the main characters come to the realisation that they can't partake in this system without betraying their home countries. I think even though I really enjoyed this book, it does have some like fair criticisms from me. It felt like that underlying message at points became too simplistic and too unsubtle and very obvious when it comes to the colonialism and racism. Like it almost feels too spelled out. It feels to me like we are being told how terrible racism, colonialism, imperialism is through the characters, rather than being shown it through their experiences and what they're living, when actually as readers we know how terrible all three of those things are and like the devastating effect they have and like the effects of the British Empire. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yeah, it feels like we're kind of being told how to experience the book in the second half rather than being allowed to form our own conclusions about the character's experience. It's something to do with like the combination of the overt racism and then the sentence being pared down into being like, this is bad. I don't think I have the language to put across what I'm trying to say, because like I said, I'm not like a skilled book reviewer, like I just review books, but that's how it felt to me. And I lost steam around 60-70% of the book because of that. It felt like two entirely separate halves of the book. There's one major event that happens, and then from there it feels like the book is completely derailed and it's all just happening, and it felt a bit like in my face obvious. I'm not sure. I really enjoyed it. I hope you understand where I'm coming from, because I would read it again regardless of all this. And if any of you have read this, I would be really interested to hear your thoughts. Maybe you can summarize my feeling a little bit more succinctly and concisely, or maybe you completely disagree with me and you think that I'm wrong, in which case I would still love to hear, because I love discussing kind of where we disagree on books. I also didn't read the footnotes, although I saw a lot of the reviews. There's very extensive footnotes that felt overdone, but yeah, I didn't read them. I haven't actually got my next book with me. It is a physical book that I did read, not a digital one. It's a library book, and it is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is the more popular cover, but this is the edition that I read, so I just like to keep the same edition that I read up on the screen. And this is a sci-fi book. So Jason Dessen is walking home and looking forward to enjoying a nice pizza and ice cream night in with his wife Daniela and their son Charlie. And then he is held at gunpoint by a stranger, a masked stranger. They kidnap him, inject him with an unknown drug, and then the next thing he remembers, he's strapped to a gurney in a lab, coming round, and someone he doesn't know is telling him welcome back. So yeah, I loved this book. If you're not usually a sci-fi reader and want to read a sci-fi book or want to give this a go, I would really recommend it. As someone that is not usually a sci-fi reader, I was nervous about reading sci-fi. I get worried it's going to go over my head. I don't have enough trust in myself clearly as a reader. I'm a very wary sci-fi reader is how I'd put it. A big theme of this is just something like everyone always thinks about, which is why I think it's been so popular and why I liked it so much, is the exploration and the questions of the paths not taken. Like, how would my life have been if I didn't do this, if I said yes to this like fork in the road dilemma that a lot of people have. Like, how would your life look if you accepted this, if you didn't do this, if you didn't give up this, you know, that kind of like butterfly effect or theory. I think it's very normal to wonder, if not this, then that. If not now, then when? If I'd have done this differently, would I be happier? This whole like parallel world notion that like a different version of you exists in every single place. So it's a fairly seamless read, and it reads very much like a thriller. There's sometimes I'm reading it and my heart is pumping. I'm like, well, this is kind of scary. But it also touches on a lot of familial bonds. It's got some like heart-wrenching, relationship-y, like light romance kind of stuff. It's got some interesting themes of friendship. It's very, very trippy at points, and not completely undigestible, even though it discusses a lot of like scientific and, you know, like physics elements. I honestly have like no criticisms of this book, and I would say if you're gonna read it, don't read any reviews beforehand. I really can't explain much without kind of like spoiling the book, and I really can't explain much anyway. Like, the whole book happened to me, but Jason Dessen and his family stuck with me for a few days after. And I'm going to watch the TV show, because I think there's a TV show on Apple TV. Me and my boyfriend are going to watch it, and I'm going to try and make him read it, because he's not a big reader. But yeah, I liked it a lot. My last read was another audiobook, and it was Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. I also did this on Spotify. This is about many things, so it's hard to synopsize, but our main character Nina is once again a food writer. Actually, it's the second book I've read about a food writer this month, and decides to join online dating platforms, meets a charming man called Max, and on the first date he tells her he's going to marry her. It's very much an exploration of being in your 30s. So it talks about, you know, like friends and family having kids and moving to Surrey, and this separation of married friends and single friends, and obviously it's got this whole notion of ghosting and dating, and also the element of like ghosts, which was really sad, is her dad has like dementia. I think it's never explicitly said, but it seems like it's dementia, and he's kind of like losing parts of himself and his memories, and she finds no comfort in that. I think this book is like objectively good, and it makes sense, and it's relatable, and I don't know if I didn't really enjoy the narrator. It explores the concept that we're all very familiar with, that is women date based on the person and love, and men date based on timing. I just wanted more from this book. I just felt a bit, I don't know if bored is the right word, because that feels too harsh, and I usually really enjoy Dolly Alderton books, but I just, yeah, I didn't get from this entirely what I wanted. I'm not gonna lie, I found it quite depressing, and maybe it was just the headspace that I was in when I was listening to it, but yeah, I found it quite depressing and thus not enjoyable to listen to. I wanted to like this book a lot more than I did, to be honest. It did have the usual formula of books I like. It had like a little bit of a serious commentary on relationships and friends and families and dating in your 30s. And I think it just didn't have that counterbalance of being light enough for me that a lot of Dolly Alderton books usually have. It's well written, it's modern, and it should be enjoyable. But yeah, overall, I just found it maybe a touch more depressing than perhaps the author intended. And I don't know if that's because of the close proximity to age I am to the main character. I just don't know. Something about it just wasn't perfect for me. That is all the books I read this month, in the month of May. Let me know what you thought. I hope you enjoyed that. Really mixed bag this month, and I am making more of a concerted effort in June to go through my physical TBR because I did a lot of e-reading and audiobooks this month, and actually nothing was out of my TBR. Unfortunately, I don't use Goodreads. I prefer Storygraph, so I will put my link to my Storygraph in the description box. Feel free to add me, and I do usually post an Instagram story of the books I'm reading, like as I start reading them. So yeah, the rest of my socials are down below on there. Let me know what you thought of today's video, and as always, I'll take book recommendations or criticisms of my reviews because I love to have a little discussion about what you thought about the books I read. My upload schedule is Wednesdays and Sundays around 6 p.m, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a little like or subscribe if you enjoyed your time here, and have a lovely rest of your week. Goodbye.